Good evening and welcome. We're continuing our Kabbala class. And last week we have spent the time to learn about the structure of the soul. We went through the levels, what the soul is made out of: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, yechida. And with every level we talked, we spent a great deal discussing what exactly the position of that part of the soul is. Tonight in the class, I want to somehow complete the summary of the subject. And God willing, most likely will continue, even though this is supposed to be the last class in the series of 6 classes regarding our commitment. We talked about God, we talked about creation, and then we talked about the soul. And we're going to go more in depth, hopefully, in the future classes, touching a little deeper on each one of the topics that we talked about. Tonight, I titled the class Soul's Purpose, because tonight's class is dedicated more on the final expression of what the soul is in this universe and what its position is all about. I would like to begin with a little introduction, and soon I will share the screen that will have more of the outline of tonight's class. The human being is called in Hebrew Adam. Adam. That's the name that God Almighty gave him when He created him. And the reason why he's called Adam is, as the verse says in the book of Genesis, because he was created from the Adamah. He was created from earth. Ofor mino Adamo. He was created dust from the earth. On the other end, there is another reason why he is named Adam, and this is based on a verse in Isaiah, chapter 14, verse 14. In Isaiah, it says, Aele al bamtei av edame la'elyon. I will mount the back of a cloud. I will match the Most High. So the word Adam is being viewed as edameh, matching. The human being matches the Most High. And as we learned last week, when God Almighty consulted with the angels, He said, Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu, let us create men in our image, in our likeness. So the human being has in it this intrinsic value that he matches the Most High. He matches the highest of the high. So this is, in a certain sense, two meanings to the same word. The word Adam means, in one hand, that this is earth, the lowest element on the planet, dust from the ground. And on the other end, the human being has in it the title of resemblance, matching the Most High. And really, this is the two sides in every human being. We have, in one hand, we have a very grounding, earth-bound character, gravitating towards materialism, to be very comfortable within the realms and limitations of nature and the boundaries of nature. We come from dirt, we come from earth. As the verse says, Afar ata ve'lafar tashuv, you are dust and you're destined to go back to dust. So a human being, is one hand, comes from the most coarse, the lowest elements that exists on the planet. And on the other end, the human being has in him that great gift that he carries in him, that image of God, that Tselem Elokim, the image of God that God created each and every one of us, that is our highest self. That this, the verse calls it the name Adam, the same name, match most high. So a human being really in his life is constantly being pulled between these two paradoxical avenues. In one hand, a human being really wants to soar high, if it's even in intellect or in behavior or in meaning of life or in spirituality, really reaching heights like the verse says, I will mount the back of a cloud. I will match the Most High, a human being, in Esak Shamayim, soaring up to heaven, to the highest of the high. But in the other hand, the human being, very surprisingly, as in the other side, who is very much attached to earth, very grounded, gravitating not just towards the negative, not talking just the demonic or negative powers of the world. I'm just talking just about the very basic grounding of being very attached to earth and very interested in what's earthbound. Now, this paradox, these two elements within the human being, are really identified in Hasidus and in Kabbalistic teachings as the human being possessing two souls. There is the godly soul, the Nefesh HaElokit, and there is the Nefesh HaBehamit, there is the animalistic soul. And this is the first introduction that the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, right in the beginning, chapter 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, first few chapters in the Tanya, the foundation book of Hasidus. The Alter Rebbe lays out the groundwork in order to understand the whole character of a human being's life, in order to understand the inner battles that a human being goes through in his life between the good and the evil and the holy and the unholy. So the Alter Rebbe lays out the foundations in order to understand the human struggle, the human condition, very brilliantly, compiled from other teachings, from other sources, verses, Talmud, written tradition, oral tradition. The Alter Rebbe lays out this notion that there are two souls. A human being, any human being, is being created with an animalistic soul. Now, when you hear the word animalistic, immediately you think about the worst, being an animal, being called an animal. But really, the term animalistic is the natural, instinctive, self-preserving mentality that every human being is created with. The need for food, the need for shelter, the need for reproduction, the need for a home, the need for security. All those very basic human instinctive needs that a human being is occupied majority of his day with, and he's contemplating about it, and he's developing relationships with certain things in his life, associating with the natural course of existence. That is called animalistic soul. We're not talking here about something evil. We're not talking here about sinful. What we're talking here about is a natural position, a natural alignment, where we are aligned in a certain way as a created human being in the limitations and in the boundaries of being in this physical world, in a physical body, that we need specific elements in order to exist, in order to live, in order to love, in order to feel nurtured, in order to feel containment, in order to feel content. And this is what the human being is occupied. Majority of his time, majority of his life, he's busy acquiring, searching for more comfort, for more security, peace of mind, being in the right environment, seeking nutrients, physical health, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about our animalistic soul, we're actually talking about our natural human alignment that each and every one of us has in our very nature. Alter Rebbe goes into more details, the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew, but this is not for the scope of tonight's class, about the different type of animalistic soul that exists out there. But the bottom line is, when we talk an animalistic soul, we have to think about human terms. We're not talking about negative. We're not talking about things that are impure or sinful. We're talking about the natural alignment of a person. Very interestingly, the Alter Rebbe touches about something that is deeply, profoundly discussed even in modern psychology, about the four elements of the soul. The way everything is created, we know the world exists with four elements: fire, wind, water, and earth. And the Alter Rebbe over there, right in the first chapter, explains that these four elements actually exist within the animalistic soul. The animalistic soul is also made of fire, air, water, and earth. And he describes the four elements very briefly, but obviously you could expand on it and you could really elaborate on it. There is actually books of today's psychology who explain different personalities based on those four elements. The Alter Rebbe talks about the four elements as fire, for example, is anger. Now, those of us who ever experience anger know exactly how anger develops. It rises. It arises. And this is the element of fire within the person. In the animalistic soul is expressed in a form of anger. Or he gives another example, haughtiness, arrogance, where the person raises himself above. The idea of fire is burning upwards and not leaving space for anything that's in front of it. When someone is angry, anything that stands in his way gets hurt. Same thing also with haughtiness and arrogance. Anything that will stand in the way usually will be insulted, will be hurt. The other element is wind. The Alter Rebbe gives an example of a spirit of wind is scoffing, joking, lightheadedness, idle chatter. People who are more in the nature of wind, the element of wind in our soul is the lack of grounding. There's no seriousness, there's no substance. It keeps on moving different directions. There's no stability. And this is more people who are more taking life very easily, very lightly. They're like a wind, they're blowing through life. And then water, the Alter Rebbe emphasizes the idea of people who are very indulging, the nature of indulging, of pleasure, delight in physical and delight in looking for enjoyment in food and in drinks and in other physical enjoyments. People, the enjoyment element of a person comes from water, the moisture, the zest of enjoyments in life. And then earth is the fourth element. The Alter Rebbe talks about depression, sadness, and laziness, this heaviness. And also the nature of people who are more earth inclined is they move very slow or they don't move at all. People who will always keep the same job the entire life, same schedule, same diet. They never go overweight, they never go underweight, they always have the same pulse. within the human soul, each one of those four elements exists. It's a very fascinating topic for itself, but it touches about it right in the first chapter of the Tanya. Second chapter in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe introduces us to a second soul. And this is big news. For most of us, it's big news because when we hear that we have a second soul, it kind of settles that big conflict that we are experiencing all the time inside ourselves. Being pulled to the earth versus being pulled to the high, to spirituality. And that is the godly soul, the Nefesh Elokit, that Alter Rebbe says, Ichelek Eloka Mimal Mamish. This is a part of God himself that is implanted in us, and he brings the verse and he breathes into his nostrils, the breath of life. And this is the divine side in a person. And obviously the divine side also has four elements. But the divine side in a person, this is a piece of God that rests inside the animalistic soul, that rests inside the body. So basically we have a physical body who has in it an animalistic soul, instinctive, natural soul. That within the natural soul comes in a godly soul. Now, when does the godly soul come to the human being? Very interesting. The godly soul begins to enter the human being by a boy at his bris, when he's being brought into the covenant. This is when his godly soul begins its entry. And by his bar mitzvah, this is when the godly soul comes in full completion. By girls, the godly soul comes in right away. By a boy, there is a process when the godly soul enters his entire existence. This is why King David, when he describes the war between our godly side and our animalistic side, he calls the godly soul, he calls him Yeled Misken Vechacham, a wise, unprivileged child. But when he talks about our animalistic soul, he calls him Melech Zaken Vexil, an old foolish king. And the reason why the animalistic soul is called an old foolish king is because he comes to the human being from the moment of conception. He becomes active at the moment of birth. And the godly soul is the disadvantaged one who shows up later. There's already a very embedded animalistic soul. He already has his first say. He's already being with the body for so long. His opinion in the body is very clear. The human being is being feathered and pampered all those years since he's a little baby, all the way till his bar mitzvah. And then suddenly the godly soul shows up, Johnny come lately, and he has to put up a fight with an animalistic soul who's already very comfortable. And this is what the Talmud tells us, that if God Almighty wouldn't give strength to our animalistic soul, to our godly soul, he would never be able to win the animalistic soul. He comes with a great disadvantage. He comes 13 years later, but he has so much power. He has so much energy, the godly soul, that like a light that pushes away darkness, he has much more power to inspire and to influence the animalistic soul and cause the transformation that this is the purpose why the human being comes to this world. The human being's purpose, the reason why we are here, the reason why we live on planet Earth, is, as we learn many times, that the purpose of a human being having a godly soul is in order to transform the animalistic soul. It begins with subduing the animalistic soul, what's called in the language of Hasidus, it's called iskafia. Iskafia means that you begin with fighting the animalistic soul, saying no to your impulses, saying no to the cravings, diminishing your involvement in physicality and materialism and the desires, in the instinctive desires of this world. I'm not talking about sin, I'm talking about just in general, just those natural instant gratifications, not to give in to our body impulse. It's called self-control. And ultimately comes to the higher level that it is a sapcha. Sapcha means transforming. That a godly soul has the ability to transform an animalistic soul. And this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So I want to share with you my screen right now. And I'm going to share with you what we're going to learn about. So this is last week we talked about the structure of our soul, the 4 letters of God's name, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida, each one of them, what is the structure of our soul, important Kabbala jargon that is important in order to study those things more in depth, to become a little bit familiar with what is the structure, what is the capabilities of our soul. Today, I want to start with the garments of the soul. But before we talk about the garments of the soul, I want to go a second to this multiple souls. So there's Nefesh Elikis, this is the godly soul I told you about. Then there is the Nefesh Abahamis, that's the animal soul that I told you about. But then there's another 2 souls. There are some of you who already learned a little bit of Hasidus, that will be quite surprising. There's something called Nefesh HaSichlis, the intellectual soul. And then something called Nefesh HaTivis, the natural soul. So some of you, for the first time, see that, will say, whoa, I always knew that there are 2 souls. There's a godly soul and there's an animal soul. Now you're suddenly introducing me to another 2 souls. There are 4 human beings in 1 human being. So this is a great, wide discussion within the teachings of Hasidus in general. And I'm not going to go into the whole back and forth. But I want to just explain what I just said before, that the job of the godly soul is to transform the animalistic soul, to cause the animal soul to be aligned with the way God wants the animal soul to be in this world. And you could put an image to your mind of a human being who has an animal. Some of you have dogs, that you need to train them. In order to take benefit from your dog, in order to benefit from, in the olden days, they used to use cattle and donkeys and camels and horses for certain work, working the fields, working in general. So the animal had to go through a training in order to be able to be beneficial for the needs of the human being. This is basically, when we talk about the godly soul influencing the animal soul, you could portray the image in your mind of a human being who gets a hold of a very sophisticated animal, and he has to train it. And you know that once you train it, you, the human being, will accomplish much more than you can accomplish without that animal. There's a verse that says, "V'rav tevuot bekoach shor." The increase of produce, of production, comes with the power of an ox. In the olden days, to work in the fields, like today we have tractors and we have machines. In the olden days, you had to have a good ox to work in the field. So the power, the production, comes as a result of owning a good ox. So better you train him, more aligned he is with what the human needs are. So the godly soul came to this world to live in this body, incarnated, for 90 years, 80 years to 120. And in that time, the godly soul has to cultivate that animalistic soul. He has to train them. He has to refine them. So the animalistic soul gets transformed. Yeah, the earth gets transformed. The animal gets transformed, and he actually becomes a servant to God. So if you just focus on your godly soul, you're not accomplishing much. Your godly soul is godly. It doesn't need any elevation. The point of your soul being incarnated into that physical body with the animal soul is to work with the animal soul and work with that body. Now, where exactly is there communication between God and animal? Where exactly is there going to be a communication between your godly soul and your animal soul? It's like two energies who are on two different planets. There's a planet called God, divinity, spirituality, holiness, and then there's animal. How could a human being even have a conversation with an animal? Where is the line of communication? Where is the link between the godly soul and the animal soul? There's no link between them. But really, there is a link. And the link is intellectual. The animal soul is not an animal in the meaning that it doesn't have intellect. The animal soul actually, like we learned about the structure of the soul, there's a certain level within the animal soul that is intellectual. Now, without the godly soul, our animal soul could learn algebra, could learn philosophy, could learn all types of brilliant ideas. Our animal soul, as a gift, the highest gift he has, is the gift of intellect. Obviously, our animalistic soul has emotions, things is attracted to, things is afraid of. But the highest part in the animal soul is his intellect. Brilliant. Some people are brilliant. And this is a part of our animalistic soul, is that he has that intellectual power. So the godly soul, who is pure divine intellect, could talk to the animal soul intellectual. The divine soul, the godly soul, communicates with the upper part of our animalistic soul, called the nefesh hasichlis. Nefesh hasichlis is that intermediate between the godly soul and the animal soul. This is the line of communication. This is where there is a relationship. This is how the animal soul could convince, could talk, the godly soul could talk to the animal soul and somehow bring him to an awareness. The bottom line is awareness and awakening. Our animal soul is only awareness and awakening. His nature is when he smells someone baking a cake. The only awareness and awakening is when he hears some music, so he starts listening, or he hears some other sounds. But if we want our animalistic soul to be aware and awake to God, that happens through the nefesh hasichlis. We learn, we study, we use the intellectual parts of our animalistic soul to cultivate intellectual stimulation and understanding about God. And this is the first mitzvah. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The idea is to meditate and contemplate about the oneness of God. Now, who is meditating? Who is contemplating? Who? The godly soul utilizes the intellectual powers of the animalistic soul to come to an understanding and awareness that God is our God. God is one. The word Shema, as we all know, means Se'u marom einechem, lift your eyes up high. Meaning to say, bring up your awareness, awaken your curiosity, develop an interest and understanding that God is our God, God is one. So the nefesh hasichlis is not a third soul, the way it sounds like. The nefesh hasichlis is the line of communication. This is the Wi-Fi connection. This is that string that attaches and brings a relationship that our animalistic soul can get inspired, can get influenced by our godly soul. And nefesh hativis, this is the natural side of the animalistic soul. Now, the natural side of the animalistic soul will get influenced once the intellectual side gets influenced. So if I explain you, and if I use forms of raising your awareness on certain things, suddenly your nature, your behavior, your entire attraction, rejection, feelings change as a result of your awareness. You never knew before, now you know. So the idea of nefesh hasichlis and nefesh hativis, this is really two parts of the animalistic soul. Nefesh hasichlis is the intellectual part of the animalistic soul. When there is where the line of communication happens between the godly and the animalistic soul. Nefesh hativis is the natural state of the animalistic soul that is in the middle. It's not fleshig and it's not milchig. It's parv. Yet could be transformed into divinity in its nature, and it could be brought down to earth. It could be Adama, like we said in the beginning, it could be earth, and it could be Edameh, resembling God Almighty. So now when you look at this multiple souls, you're going to have a whole new understanding. First of all, you're going to understand the names, Elokit, Abrahamit, Hasichlit, Hativit. First of all, just to get to know the names. But what you understand now, who is, you understand the whole structure. What exactly is the purpose? And how is that purpose of the soul being accomplished from a soul perspective? Now you understand, actually, at least begin to understand how this structure functions. Any questions on that? Feel free to turn on your microphone and ask any questions. Or if you want, you could text to the chat of the group of the class. There's a chat. And feel comfortable to do it anytime during the class. I'm going to look at it and answer any questions as long as they are connected to the class that we are teaching. I want to go up a second to the garments of the soul. A little bit more of an understanding. You know, we spoke about the structure of the soul last week. And I want to talk a little bit more about the garments of the soul. So as we said, there is the godly soul and there's the animalistic soul. And I want to go a second to the animalistic soul. Because for some of us, it's easier to understand when we talk about animalistic soul because it's what we are more relating to. Godly soul sometimes is big news for us. And some of us are not so attached to our godly side. It takes a little bit more work. What does it mean, the garments of the soul? So the word garments, this Alter Rebbe uses the word in Hebrew, it's called levushim. The word levushim means simply clothing. So there's the soul itself. Yeah. Let's talk about emotional, intellectual. That's the soul itself. And then there is the expression of that. How do you express what's happening on the inside? So you have a great idea. What do you use to express your idea? So there are three ways. There is the idea comes in thought. Think about it. Multiple levels in thinking. There is speech, talk about it. And then there is action. You can write. You can write out the idea. Now, the reason why they are called garments is because the same way like clothing. Before you go outside, in order to show yourself, you put on a certain garment. That garment is almost like a uniform that tells what's happening on the inside. So when someone dresses in a certain way, we know a little bit about the person's character. We know if he's a policeman, we know if he's a lawyer, we know if he's a teacher. I mean, especially in the days when garments actually were symbols of status. I mean, today, especially in the world of Microsoft and Amazon, where everybody's wearing jeans and t-shirts, our garments are not really a good example to discuss garments of our soul. But here we're talking about the garments is forms of expression. Something that our ideas have to dress in order to express themselves. So there is the pure wisdom, but if I want to have an expression to the wisdom, I need to be able to put it in thought, meditate about it, contemplate about it, or I have to speak about it, use my mouth and my capabilities of speech to express that idea, or I use action. I could use writing, I could use illustration. There's different ways how to express wisdom. And obviously the same thing is with feeling. You have a feeling in your heart, and the feeling could remain a feeling. But you could talk about it, using speech to express the feelings, to say what you feel right now. Or you could think about that feeling, or you could act on the feeling, doing acts of love or acts of kindness, whatever the feeling is in your mind right now. This is why it's important to remember this thought, speech, and action. These are the garments of the soul. And then Alter Rebbe in Tanya goes in great length discussing each one of those garments, what is deeper, and talks about learning Torah versus doing mitzvahs and prayer. So thought is learning Torah. Speech is also learning Torah, using your mouth, using your words in learning. And action is more doing mitzvahs. And he talks about the different relationship between each one of those things with God Almighty. So he talks about this, that when you're learning Torah is when you find the deepest connection with God, because it's thought. And thought is the most private, the most personal. Okay. Now, thought, speech, and action is very important to pay attention to the alignment, to the structure of how a human being is structured. So in the middle of the column, the middle column, Moach, Lev, Kaved, brain, heart, and liver. One of the fundamental elements between the creation of a human being versus the creation of an animal is very much visible in the structure, their physical posture of an animal versus a human being. An animal, the brain and the heart and the liver are all on the same level. A human being, on the other end, is standing upright. The brain is on top, the heart is in the middle, and the liver, meaning to say the organs of reproduction, of action, excrements, all of it is below. And it's very interesting that the word Moach, Lev, Kaved, the first letter in each one of them is Melech. Melech means king. That the king of the universe, meaning to say the highest supreme being is the human being, is created in a form of Melech. First comes the mind, then comes the heart, and then comes the liver. And really, truly, that's exactly how a human being has to conduct himself. The idea is that a human being has to conduct himself in a way that his mind dominates. Moyach Shalit alalev. The mind is the one who is in charge on the heart. This is one of the fundamentals of the Tanya as well. That a human being in his very nature can cultivate a natural life where his mind, his brain, will be in charge on the heart. In simple life, what it means is that you get to know someone before you love him. I know in the modern world, there's something called falling in love. And then we try to understand what happened to us. And then somehow we're trying to figure out what to do with each other. The heart jumps out first of your skin, and the brain obviously is numb at that moment. Maybe the liver is showing something, some action as well. But that's not a human way, the way things are supposed to happen. By a human being, the way things are supposed to happen is, first of all, there has to be an intellectual awareness. This is why we need to have a dating process where you actually talk to someone. You get to know him on an intellectual level. Get to know him on a mental attraction. A certain awareness and understanding about the person you're dating. The next step, once you get to know someone, the relationship grows. The proper way it should happen is that your heart should start feeling towards that person. So it begins with very subtle feelings in your heart because it's still very intellectual. So the feelings are not yet fiery, flamey, exciting feelings. The feelings are very intellectual at the beginning. But ultimately, what's supposed to happen when longer you know the person, more that person has an effect on you, the heart comes into action. And ultimately, it comes down to the liver as well into action. This is the way a melech, this is the way the king, that's the way God structured us, is that our brain, our mind has to be the one conducting, leading, and obviously the heart will follow and the action will follow as well. And in the society that we live in, somehow we idolized and idealized some interesting structure where it's about falling in love. It's all about the attraction. And then people wondering what happened once the attraction goes away. What am I doing next? So we have to figure out how we're going to maintain the relationship once, we don't feel anymore in love the way we used to. But if the relationship begins with an intellectual awareness, something really special about that person that touches me in a very, very deep place intellectually, so even when the feelings are not there, I still love that person unconditionally. So this is when we talk about the structure of our soul, the way God structured us in a very basic way. The moach, lev, kaved, the brain, heart, liver, that structure of, in Sefirot, you could see on the left side, I wrote the way it's in the world of Sefirot, Chabad, Chagas, Neim, Chesed, Chochmah bin Adas, that's the moach. And then there is Chagas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, that's the heart, that's the chest, the hands. And then there is Neim, that's the lower part, that's the Kaved, that's the liver. That's the structure, how things are supposed to be. So just completing this topic, because I want to touch tonight on reincarnation as well as I promised you last week. So just to complete the topic is, when we talk about our soul's purpose, and we understand the multiplicity of souls that we have, the godly versus the animal, the inspiring elements, that this is the intellectual power, where we use our Chabad, where we use our intellectual awarenesses to inspire our animalistic soul, to cause transformation, to cause the animal to stop being an animal, to cause the animal to become cultivated, to cause the animal to be harnessed and serve a higher purpose. The natural, the hativit, the natural elements of our soul somehow are going through a transformation and expresses itself in a new brain, a new heart, and a new liver, the way God Almighty wants us to be. Is there any questions anybody wants to ask before we're entering a completely different topic, the topic of reincarnation? Okay, I don't know if anybody has any questions here, but I'm going to move over to the topic of reincarnation. Okay. I said last week that I want to talk about reincarnation a little bit. And reincarnation is a very, very broad subject in Kabbala. And I'm aware that other religions talk about reincarnation as well. And I would like to really touch on the topic because it's very important just to clarify, again, the jargon of certain Kabbalistic expressions that is important to sometimes make clear, so we really understand what exactly is the topic of reincarnation. So again, in 10 minutes, you're not going to hear major secrets, but you're going to learn basically what is reincarnation all about. So every soul that comes down to this world, who is being incarnated into a physical body, is sent to this world to cultivate the animalistic soul, to cultivate the world around them. When we talked about the purpose of creation, the purpose of creation is we are sent down to this world to bring meaning and purpose to this world. This is why God created the universe, and this is why God is creating us to be in the center of the universe and using our many talents and all our capabilities to transform and to sanctify this world, beginning with sanctifying our own animalistic side. Now, in simple words, we come down to this world to fulfill the mitzvahs. This is why we're here. There's a certain amount of mitzvahs. There's 613 commandments that every soul has to accomplish. There are 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments, and it coincides with the physical limbs in a human being's body. There's 248 organs, and there are 365 veins in the male body. So the mitzvahs and the averos, the sin and the mitzvahs, is associated with the human body. Every mitzvah that you do, you're fixing, you're correcting another part of your body. Now, same way the body has 613 limbs and veins, our soul also has 613 limbs and veins, spiritual limbs and veins. And we are incarnated into this world to accomplish all those commandments. Now, what happens is we live in this world, a lot of complications, a lot of distractions. And when we come to finish our business, after the amount of time that was given to us, 70, 80 years, our soul comes to heaven, and some of us have unfinished business. Now, for unfinished business, there is something called Gilgul. Gilgul means your soul comes back to another body, and you get a chance to finish the business you didn't finish. And in the words of Kabbala, it says that we have 3 incarnations. We have 3 Gilgulim. There are 3 times which every soul comes down to a physical body. And there's a lot of evidence to it in the scriptures, a lot of Talmudic anecdotes, names of sages, names of biblical characters that we know one was an incarnation of the other one. And there's a whole book written by Reb Chaim Vital called Shar HaGilgulim. Chaim Vital was a student of the Hari, and he wrote a whole book called Shar HaGilgulim about reincarnation. He brings a lot of interesting things that you understand based on reincarnation. For example, Akiva and Yaakov. Rabbi Akiva was a Gilgul of Yaakov, our forefather. Both of them had a wife named Rachel. And he just explains certain things that Rabbi Akiva did there was fixing certain things that Yaakov didn't accomplish. But again, this is the idea of Gilgul. So when you ask someone, do we believe in reincarnation? Absolutely. A reincarnation is not a punishment. Reincarnation is the soul has to come back to this world to finish up certain parts, certain mitzvahs that the soul didn't finish in this world. That's called Gilgul. Now, there is a reincarnation as a punishment. When that is your soul is being incarnated into something outside of a human being. So let's say sometimes there's the incarnation of the human soul in an animal. So there's different levels of punishment. There's when the soul is being incarnated into a kosher animal. There's when the soul is being incarnated in a non-kosher animal. There is when the soul is being incarnated into vegetation, when our soul is being incarnated into minerals. And this is usually for punishment because being incarnated in an animal, a human being being incarnated in an animal, is not his natural habitat. So it usually causes a great deal of suffering for the soul. And the Kabbalistic teachings tell us exactly for which sin you get incarnated in which one of those elements. And you could read about that in other places in Kabbala. I'm not going to spend in this tonight's class talking about that. But in general, there is their positive reincarnation, where our soul comes back to the world being recycled again to be able to complete certain tasks in this world. And it's usually a maximum of 3 times that the soul comes back. Some souls came back more than 3 times. And then there is the negative reincarnation, that is being incarnated for a certain period of time before entering heaven or hell. The soul has to go through some punishment of being incarnated into animals, vegetation, minerals, and so on and so forth. Now, there is another term besides Gilgul. It's called Ibur. Ibur means impregnation. Sometimes there is a certain mitzvah that even if you're going to reincarnate you multiple times, you're not going to accomplish that mitzvah. So, for example, one of the examples is divorce. One of the 613 commandments is the mitzvah of getting divorced. It's a commandment that if someone doesn't like his wife and they don't have a great relationship, you're supposed to give it a divorce. Now, I lived a whole life. I did all the mitzvahs, had a great life. I loved my wife. I never contemplated about the mitzvah of divorce. I never had a chance to do the mitzvah of giving a divorce. Then there are mitzvahs that are connected only to Kohanim. I'm not a Kohen. I cannot do those mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah called chalitza. Chalitza means that if, a husband dies, God forbid, and he lives his wife without any children, she has to marry the husband's brother. And if she doesn't want, or he doesn't want, they have to do, it's called a chalitza, something with a shoe, it's a whole ceremony. People can live their entire life and they will never have to make chalitza. It's one of the mitzvahs, it's one of the commandments. So what happens is, Kabbala explains there's something called ibur, impregnation. So what happens is like this, there's a one person who does that mitzvah, and in his soul, somehow get impregnant, like a pregnancy, get impregnant all the soul of all those people who didn't have a chance to do this mitzvah. So let's say we're going to have a chalitza somewhere in New York. Now there is thousands of souls, maybe even millions of souls, who will never get a chance to do this mitzvah. So when that human being does that mitzvah, what's going to happen at that moment, all the souls who are waiting for that accomplishment of that commandment to get it to the number 613, all those souls will get impregnant in that person who will do that mitzvah at that moment. And when he does that mitzvah, it's considered like they were all partners with him in that mitzvah. That's called ibur. There's a third term called dibuk. Now, dibuk is negative. Dibuk is usually also incarnation or reincarnation. This is usually a soul who cannot find a place of rest. And he attaches himself to another soul, and it usually comes in a form of harassment. He torments the other soul. And there's ways of getting rid of it through prayers and through forgiveness and through the mitzvahs. Sometimes it's the soul just needs help. Sometimes it's the soul just needs a kaddish. The soul just needs someone to do a mitzvah. Because sometimes it's one mitzvah that helps that soul depart to the next realm, to the next element. So Dibuk is also a form of reincarnation, but it's a reincarnation, a form of attachment. It gets attached, not impregnant, that this is actually a positive. Attachment is like someone gets something attached to him and he has to just get rid of it. So I just wanted to touch on this topic of reincarnation because it's connected a little bit to the topic of our soul and our structure of our soul and our existence of our soul. So I want a little bit more of an understanding about what life is all about, what we go through in our life. So just to conclude, we spent a journey here of a couple of weeks. We talked about God, the names of God, the different levels in God, the way God's light ascends and descends from the highest to the low. We talked about creation. We talked about creation from God's perspective. Then we talked about the creation from the the creature's perspective, purpose of creation. We talked about the soul, the general structure of the soul, the incarnation of the soul, and the purpose of the soul. This 6 classes was just a smorgasbord. You know what a smorgasbord is? You know, when you go to a wedding and they have all this food that you could go, you could pick from every type of food, something. This is a smorgasbord of a lot of ideas. Some of those ideas maybe flew over your head and you just listened and you heard, and maybe one day will make sense. But what I intend to do is I want to use this Tuesday night, because it happened to be for me as well a very great opportunity to develop some of the ideas. So I want to go a little bit more in depth. Those of you who want to join, and God willing, in the future weeks, maybe even next week, Tuesday, we're going to begin studying more in depth topics in Kabbala. We're going to have multiple sessions of classes starting hopefully next Tuesday. I'm going to send out an email about it. If you don't get our emails, please sign up on our website to receive the emails. We're going to begin with the topic of Tzimtzum, really learning it in a very deep, in a very profound understanding. So it's going to be probably a good 5 or 6 lessons on the topic of Tzimtzum, to really understand Tzimtzum, understand the meaning of Tzimtzum, gives you a whole new understanding about the relationship between a human being and God, and in general, on many, many levels. And following that, maybe we're going to learn more in depth the 10 Sfirot. We're going to go through topics. It's very important that we become more aware and more understanding on many of those Kabbalistic teachings. So please look out for those emails, and it would be great to spend more time studying and really delving into those deep mystical teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidus, and get a little more of a real and close understanding and connection to God and to everything that God represents. So,
good.
who I was talking to?